Sarah, 24. The President of the United States just said my name on live television, calling me a national hero. But 6 months ago, my own parents threw me out like garbage, screaming that I was a worthless failure who'd never amount to anything. They said I was an embarrassment to the family name. My mom literally packed my bags while my dad changed the locks. I spent 3 weeks sleeping in my beat-up Honda Civic, showering at truck stops, eating dollar menu burgers. My perfect older brother didn't even return my calls. I was completely alone, broke, and honestly, I wanted to disappear forever. But sometimes the universe has other plans. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most end up watching you succeed on the biggest stage imaginable. And sometimes the person you least expect becomes your guardian angel. This is how I went from homeless failure to presidential hero. And trust me, the ending will shock you. Ever felt invisible in your own home? I have. Growing up in the Chen household meant living under a microscope of impossibly high expectations, but only if you were the chosen one. My older brother Marcus had that honor. At 28, he was everything my parents dreamed of. Harvard MBA, 6-figure salary at a tech startup, engaged to a surgeon, living in a downtown penthouse. Meanwhile, I was Sarah, the family disappointment trudging through community college with an associate degree in computer science that my father called a participation trophy for people who couldn't handle real education. Every family dinner was a masterclass in comparison. Marcus closed another $1 million deal this week, Mom would announce, her voice dripping with pride. Sarah, how are your little computer classes going? The way she said little computer classes made it sound like I was finger painting in kindergarten. My attempts to explain data analysis or cybersecurity concepts were met with glazed stares and quick subject changes back to Marcus's latest achievement. The comparisons weren't subtle. When Marcus bought his first luxury car, Dad posted 17 Facebook photos with captions about hard work paying off. When I finally saved enough for a used Honda Civic, Dad's only comment was asking if I'd checked the safety recalls because your judgment isn't exactly reliable. When Marcus got promoted, we had a family celebration dinner at the most expensive restaurant in town. When I landed my first full-time job as a junior data analyst, Mom asked if it came with health insurance because at least that's something. Living in Marcus's shadow wasn't just about achievements, it was about worth. My parents spoke to him like he was their peer, asking for his opinions on investments and politics. They spoke to me like I was a permanent teenager who might break something valuable if left unsupervised. When relatives visited, Marcus was showcased like a trophy while I was quietly encouraged to maybe help in the kitchen or keep busy upstairs. The worst part wasn't the comparisons themselves, but how they made me question everything about myself. Was I actually smart or just delusional? Were my interests in cybersecurity and data patterns actually valuable, or was I wasting time on fantasies? When your own parents treat your passions like hobbies a child will eventually outgrow, it becomes impossible to trust your own instincts. I threw myself into online courses, cybersecurity forums, and freelance projects, desperate to prove I wasn't the failure they saw. But every small success felt meaningless when your biggest cheerleaders were internet strangers with usernames like CyberNinja47. I needed my family to see me, really see me, not just as Marcus's disappointing little sister, but as Sarah, someone with her own talents and potential. But that recognition never came. Instead, what came was something much worse. The night everything exploded, and I discovered just how little my own parents actually thought of me. The night that would either destroy me completely or become the first step toward the most unexpected revenge story of my life. That night started like every other family dinner from hell, but it ended with me losing everything I thought was home. Marcus had just announced his engagement to Dr. Jennifer Liu, and my parents were practically floating with pride. Mom had already started planning the wedding, talking about venues and guest lists like she was organizing a royal coronation. Dad kept saying things like, "Finally, some good news in this family," and "at least one of our children knows how to make us proud." I should have stayed quiet. I should have smiled and nodded and played the supportive little sister role I'd mastered over 24 years. But something inside me snapped when Dad raised his wine glass and toasted to Marcus for proving that success runs in the Chen bloodline. The implication was crystal clear. I wasn't really part of that bloodline, at least not the successful part. "What about my promotion last month?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I'd been made senior data analyst at my company, a significant jump in responsibility and salary. It wasn't Harvard MBA level, but it was progress, real progress. Dad barely glanced at me. "Sarah, sweetie, analyzing spreadsheets isn't exactly changing the world." Mom laughed that nervous laugh she did when she was embarrassed by something I'd said. Marcus looked uncomfortable but didn't defend me. He never defended me. "It's not just spreadsheets," I said, my voice getting stronger. "I work on cybersecurity threat assessment. I help protect companies from..." "From what?" Dad interrupted. "From imaginary internet problems? Sarah, you need to be realistic about what you're actually contributing to society. Marcus is creating jobs, driving innovation, building something meaningful. You're just playing with computers." The room went silent except for the sound of my heart hammering in my chest. 24 years of being dismissed, minimized, and treated like a consolation prize came flooding out in words I couldn't take back. "You know what? I'm tired of being treated like I don't exist in this family. I'm tired of every conversation being about Marcus and his perfect life while you act like I'm some charity case you're stuck supporting. I have skills, I have value, and if you can't see that, maybe the problem isn't me." Dad's face turned red. "Skills? Value? Sarah, you're 24 years old, living in our house, driving a car we helped you buy, and working a job that barely pays enough to cover your student loans. What exactly have you accomplished that gives you the right to lecture us about anything?" "I'm trying to build something," I said, standing up from the table. "But it's pretty hard when your own family treats you like a failure before you even start." "Because you are a failure." The words exploded out of Dad's mouth like he'd been holding them back for years. "You've been a disappointment since high school. Average grades, no ambition, no direction. We've given you every opportunity and you've wasted all of them. Marcus earned everything he has. You just expect everything to be handed to you." Mom jumped in, her voice cold and cutting. "We've been patient, Sarah. We've supported you financially and emotionally for years, hoping you'd eventually figure out how to be successful like your brother. But you're 24 now. It's time to face reality. You're not Marcus. You're never going to be Marcus. And we're tired of pretending that's okay." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. These weren't words said in anger. These were truths they'd been thinking for years. "Fine," I whispered, then louder. "Fine. If that's how you really feel, then I'm done trying to prove myself to you." I headed toward the stairs to pack, but Dad's final words followed me. "Be out by Sunday. We're changing the locks Monday morning." Sunday night, I sat in my Honda Civic in a Walmart parking lot, surrounded by garbage bags full of my life. The reality of homelessness hit me like a sledgehammer. I had nowhere to go. My college friends lived in tiny shared apartments or back with their own families. I couldn't afford a security deposit on even the cheapest studio apartment, and my credit wasn't good enough for most landlords anyway. My savings account had exactly $437, which might last 2 weeks if I ate nothing but ramen. The first night, I tried sleeping in the driver's seat, but every sound made me jump. Was that security approaching? Were those footsteps? By 3 a.m., I was wide awake, staring at the parking lot lights and wondering how my life had fallen apart so completely. My phone had 17 missed calls from Marcus, but I couldn't face talking to him. What was he going to say? That our parents didn't mean it? That they loved me? I'd heard their real feelings loud and clear. Days blended into a nightmare routine. Wake up cramped and aching in my car. Drive to a gas station bathroom to brush my teeth and wash my face in the sink, hoping employees wouldn't notice I was basically living there. Go to work and pretend everything was normal while my coworkers complained about their commutes and weekend plans. Eat lunch alone at my desk, stretching one sandwich into my only meal of the day. After work, find a new parking lot to sleep in, because staying in the same place too long meant getting kicked out by security. The worst part was the shame. I was a college graduate with a decent job, but I was homeless. I was showering with baby wipes in public restrooms and doing laundry at 24-hour laundromats at midnight when no one would see me. I was that person I'd walked past 1,000 times without really seeing, invisible, desperate, trying to maintain dignity while living out of a car. My job performance started slipping. How could it not? I was exhausted, malnourished, and emotionally devastated. My supervisor, Janet, pulled me aside after I missed a deadline. "Sarah, is everything okay at home? You seem distracted lately." I almost laughed. What home? Instead, I mumbled something about family stress and promised to do better. The breaking point came on a Thursday night during a thunderstorm. I'd been living in my car for 3 weeks, and the rain was so heavy I couldn't see 5 feet in any direction. Water started leaking through the passenger side window, soaking my clean clothes and the pillow I'd been using. I sat there in the dark, listening to rain pound the roof, and just started sobbing. Not quiet crying, but ugly, desperate sobs that came from somewhere deeper than sadness. This was what rock bottom felt like. I called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. "Sarah, oh my God, I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Where are you?" His voice was worried, maybe even panicked. For a moment, I almost told him everything, almost asked for help, almost admitted that our parents were right and I was a complete failure who couldn't even manage to be homeless with dignity. Instead, I hung up. If I was going to survive this, I had to do it myself. No more expecting family to save me. No more hoping for someone else to believe in me. I had to figure out how to believe in myself, even when everything around me was falling apart. That night, soaked and shivering in my car, I made a decision that would change everything. I pulled out my laptop, connected to the Walmart Wi-Fi, and started applying for every remote freelance cybersecurity job I could find. If my family thought I was worthless, I'd prove them wrong. If the traditional path wasn't working, I'd create my own path. I had nothing left to lose, which meant I finally had nothing left to fear. 3 days later, while hiding in a McDonald's bathroom stall trying to take a conference call about a freelance project, my phone buzzed with an email that would change my entire life. The sender was Data Secure Solutions with a generic Gmail address, but the subject line made my heart skip. Urgent, senior analyst position, immediate start, remote work available. I almost deleted it as spam. In my experience, legitimate job offers didn't come with subject lines that sounded like lottery scams. But desperation makes you consider opportunities you'd normally ignore, so I opened it while balancing my phone on my knee in that tiny McDonald's stall. "Ms. Chen, we've reviewed your cybersecurity portfolio and believe you're uniquely qualified for a time-sensitive project requiring advanced pattern recognition skills. This is a 6-month contract position, fully remote, starting salary $75,000 with performance bonuses. Due to the sensitive nature of this work, we require an immediate response and can begin onboarding within 48 hours. Please reply if interested." $75,000. That was more than I'd made in my entire previous job. It was also suspiciously perfect timing for someone living in their car with $400 to their name. Every instinct screamed scam, but I was past the point of being cautious. What did I have left to steal? My dignity was already gone, my family had abandoned me, and my Honda Civic wasn't exactly valuable collateral. I replied within 5 minutes. "I'm interested. When can we talk?" The response came back so fast I wondered if it was automated. "Conference call tomorrow at 2 p.m. Details attached." The attachment was a secure meeting link and a brief NDA to sign electronically. The NDA was surprisingly sophisticated for a scammer, filled with legal language about information security and national infrastructure protection. Either this was the most elaborate fraud in history, or it was legitimate. The next day, I drove to a public library for better Wi-Fi and privacy. At exactly 2 p.m., I clicked the meeting link. A professional-looking man in his 50s appeared on screen, sitting in what looked like a government office with American flags in the background. "Ms. Chen? I'm Director Williams. Thank you for your interest in this position. I'll be direct. We need someone with your specific skill set to analyze data patterns that could affect national security. This work is classified, which is why we're hiring contractors rather than going through traditional channels." My mouth went dry. "National security? Are you with the government?" Williams smiled grimly. "Let's say we work closely with various agencies. The important thing is that we've identified you as someone with exceptional pattern recognition abilities and a clean background check. You have no significant personal attachments that could compromise your objectivity, and your recent personal challenges suggest you're highly motivated to succeed. The way he said personal challenges made me realize they knew about my situation. Somehow they knew I was living in my car. They knew my parents had kicked me out. They knew I was desperate. Instead of feeling violated, I felt oddly relieved. At least someone was paying attention to my life, even if it was strangers conducting background checks. What exactly would I be analyzing? I asked. Williams pulled up a screen-sharing presentation showing data streams that looked like network traffic logs. We intercept massive amounts of digital communications daily. Most of it is routine, but occasionally we identify patterns that suggest coordinated threats against U.S. infrastructure. We need analysts who can spot anomalies others might miss. Think of it as finding needles in haystacks, except the needles could prevent catastrophic attacks on power grids, financial systems, or transportation networks. It sounded too important for someone like me. Why not use FBI analysts or CIA specialists? Williams leaned forward. Because sometimes the best insights come from outside traditional channels. You see patterns differently than people who've been trained to see them the same way for decades. That fresh perspective could save lives. The call lasted 30 minutes. By the end, I had login credentials for a secure portal, a federal contractor ID number, and direct deposit information for a salary that would change my life overnight. As I sat in that library parking lot afterwards, staring at my phone, one thought kept running through my head. This was either the opportunity of a lifetime or the beginning of something far more dangerous than homelessness. Either way, I was about to find out exactly what I was capable of when everything was on the line. My first day as a federal contractor started in the most mundane way possible, sitting in my car in a Starbucks parking lot, connecting to their Wi-Fi to access a government portal that would supposedly save the country. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was still technically homeless while working on national security. I'd used my first advance payment to get a cheap motel room for the week, but it would be another month before I could afford a real apartment. The secure portal looked like every boring corporate dashboard I'd ever seen, except this one had classification levels and encryption warnings plastered everywhere. My assignment seemed almost disappointingly simple. Analyze network traffic patterns from major telecommunications hubs across the country. Director Williams had uploaded terabytes of data with timestamps going back 6 months, all supposedly routine internet traffic that their automated systems had flagged for human review. At first glance, it really did look routine. Email servers talking to each other, social media platforms updating, streaming services delivering content. But after 3 days of staring at data flows, I started noticing something odd. Buried in all the normal traffic were tiny anomalies, data packets that were slightly larger than they should be, routing paths that took unnecessary detours, timestamps that didn't quite align with normal network behavior. Most analysts would have dismissed these as routine network hiccups. Internet traffic is messy by nature, full of inefficiencies and random variations. But I'd spent years in cybersecurity forums learning about advanced persistent threats and nation-state attacks. I knew that the best hackers hide in plain sight, disguising their activities as normal network noise. I started mapping the anomalies geographically and chronologically. The patterns were subtle, but they were definitely patterns. Whoever was behind this had been incredibly careful, spreading their activities across different time zones and network providers to avoid detection. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They were human beings working during human hours. Even when they tried to randomize their activities, there were subtle rhythms that matched business days in certain parts of the world. By the end of my first week, I had a working theory that made my blood run cold. This wasn't random network noise or even typical cybercriminal activity. This looked like reconnaissance. Someone was systematically mapping critical infrastructure networks, identifying vulnerabilities, and establishing backdoors for future access. The geographical distribution suggested they were specifically targeting power grids, water treatment facilities, and transportation systems across the northeastern United States. I documented everything in a detailed report and submitted it through the secure portal. Within hours, my phone rang. It was Director Williams, and he sounded different, urgent, almost excited. Ms. Chen, we need to discuss your findings immediately. Can you be available for a secure video call in 1 hour? During that call, Williams was joined by 2 other officials whose faces were blurred and voices distorted. They grilled me for 2 hours about my analysis methodology, asking technical questions that pushed the limits of my knowledge. But instead of being skeptical, they seemed increasingly convinced that I'd uncovered something significant. "Ms. Chen," one of the blurred figures said, "what you've identified aligns with intelligence we've been gathering from other sources. We believe you've discovered the preliminary phase of a coordinated attack on U.S. infrastructure. The question now is, can you track their activities in real time and help us predict their next moves?" The weight of responsibility hit me like a truck. 3 weeks ago, I was sleeping in my car, convinced I was a failure. Now I was potentially the only person standing between normal American life and a catastrophic cyber attack. My parents had always said I was wasting time playing with computers. Turns out those computer games might save the country. "I can try," I told them, my voice steadier than I felt. "But I'll need access to live network feeds, not just historical data." "Consider it done," Williams replied. "And Ms. Chen, this project just became your top priority. Everything else in your life comes second." I almost laughed. What else was there in my life? This job was all I had left, which meant I was about to give everything to stopping something I still didn't fully understand. With access to real-time network data, the scope of what I was tracking became terrifyingly clear. The attackers weren't just conducting reconnaissance, they were actively testing the defenses of critical infrastructure systems across 17 states. Every night between 2 and 4 a.m. Eastern Time, subtle probes would hit power grid control systems, water treatment facilities, and transportation hubs. The attacks were so sophisticated that they appeared to be routine maintenance or diagnostic checks. I'd moved from the motel to a month-to-month furnished apartment, but I barely saw it except to sleep. My entire existence revolved around patterns on screens, tracking digital breadcrumbs left by hackers who were clearly professionals. This wasn't some random group of cybercriminals looking for quick profits. This was a coordinated campaign with military-level precision and patience. The breakthrough came during my 3rd week of real-time monitoring. I'd been tracking anomalous traffic to a power station in Pennsylvania when I noticed something that made my heart race. The same unique digital signature I'd seen in attacks on water systems in Virginia and transportation networks in New York. It was like finding the same fingerprint at multiple crime scenes. But this fingerprint was virtually invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for. The attackers were using a technique called living off the land, where they hijacked legitimate network tools and protocols to hide their activities. To automated security systems, their attacks looked like routine IT maintenance. Only human analysis could spot the subtle timing patterns that revealed their true nature. I spent the next 48 hours building a comprehensive map of every system they'd touched. The scope was staggering, over 300 critical infrastructure targets across the northeastern corridor, from Boston to Washington, D.C. They'd been inside these systems for months, quietly installing backdoors and mapping internal networks. They weren't just planning an attack, they were planning to cripple the entire region simultaneously. When I presented my findings to Director Williams and his mysterious colleagues, the reaction was immediate and intense. The blurred faces on the screen became animated, voices sharp with urgency. "Ms. Chen, are you absolutely certain about this timeline?" one of them asked. "Because if you're right, they're not in reconnaissance phase anymore. They're in final preparation." I pulled up the data visualization I'd created, showing attack patterns overlaid on a map of the eastern seaboard. "Look at the timing," I said, pointing to clusters of activity. 6 months ago, they were doing broad reconnaissance. 3 months ago, they started targeting specific systems. Last month, they began testing actual control mechanisms. And this week, I highlighted the most recent data points. This week, they're downloading configuration files and testing emergency shutdown procedures. The room went silent except for the sound of rapid typing from whoever was on the other end of those secure connections. Finally, Williams spoke. "Ms. Chen, we need you to identify their command and control infrastructure. Where are these attacks actually coming from?" That was the million-dollar question I'd been working on for days. The attackers were routing their traffic through dozens of compromised servers around the world, making it nearly impossible to trace back to the source. But I'd noticed something interesting in the timing patterns. Despite all their geographic misdirection, there were subtle delays that suggested their actual operators were working from a specific time zone. Based on response times and operational patterns, I said, pulling up my analysis, I believe the actual operators are based somewhere in Eastern Europe, probably Ukraine or Russia. But here's the problem. They're not working alone. Some of the infrastructure they're using appears to be owned by a domestic entity. Someone inside the United States is helping them. The implications hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. This wasn't just a foreign attack. It was treason. And somehow, a homeless college dropout had become the only person who could see the full scope of what was coming. "How long do we have?" Williams asked quietly. I looked at the data one more time, hoping I was wrong. Based on their current activity patterns, maybe 2 weeks, possibly less. Armed with my comprehensive analysis, Director Williams assured me that appropriate channels would be notified immediately. I assumed that meant FBI counterintelligence, NSA cyber warfare units, and Department of Homeland Security would spring into action. What I didn't expect was to be sitting in an FBI field office 3 days later, watching a skeptical agent treat my findings like an elaborate conspiracy theory. Special Agent Rodriguez looked like she'd rather be investigating bank robberies than listening to a 24-year-old explain network traffic patterns. "Ms. Chen, let me understand this correctly. You believe a coordinated cyber attack is being planned against hundreds of infrastructure targets based on your analysis of internet traffic patterns?" Her tone suggested she thought I'd been watching too many movies. "It's not just traffic patterns," I said, pulling out printed copies of my analysis. "It's systematic reconnaissance followed by vulnerability testing, escalating to active penetration of control systems. The timing, scope, and methodology all point to a coordinated campaign by state-level actors." Agent Rodriguez flipped through my charts and graphs with the enthusiasm of someone reading a phone book. "And you discovered this how? Working for some government contractor I've never heard of?" She'd obviously called Directory Williams' number and gotten transferred to a generic voicemail system. The whole arrangement was designed to be untraceable, which made me look like either a fraud or a crazy person. "Look at the data," I insisted. "The patterns are undeniable. Someone has spent months mapping critical infrastructure across 17 states. They're not script kiddies or ransomware groups. This is advanced persistent threat activity consistent with nation-state actors." "Ms. Chen," Agent Rodriguez said, closing the folder, "do you have any idea how many people contact us every month claiming to have uncovered massive cyber conspiracies? Most of them are unemployed IT workers with too much time on their hands and active imaginations." The dismissal stung, especially the unemployed part. Technically, I was a federal contractor working on classified national security issues, but I couldn't prove it without violating my NDA. From her perspective, I was exactly what she'd described. A desperate person making wild claims. My next stop was the local police cybercrime unit, where Detective Morrison at least listened politely before explaining that infrastructure protection was way above our pay grade and suggesting I contact the FBI. When I told him I'd already tried that route, he shrugged sympathetically and said there wasn't much local law enforcement could do about theoretical cyber threats. I tried calling the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity Division, where I was transferred through 6 different departments before being told that specific threat intelligence needed to come through official channels, and that they couldn't act on unsolicited reports from private citizens. When I mentioned I was working as a federal contractor, they asked for my supervisor's contact information. When I gave them Director Williams' number, they said they'd look into it and get back to me. Nobody got back to me. The frustration was overwhelming. I had detailed evidence of an imminent attack on critical infrastructure, but every official I contacted treated me like a paranoid conspiracy theorist. The very secrecy that protected the government operation I was working for made it impossible to prove my credibility to other government agencies. That night, sitting in my cheap apartment surrounded by printouts and laptop screens, I realized I was completely alone with information that could save thousands of lives. The attackers were continuing their preparations, getting closer to their deadline every day, while the people who should be stopping them couldn't be bothered to take my warnings seriously. I called Director Williams, hoping he could make some official contacts to get my intelligence to the right people. The call went straight to a generic voicemail. I tried the secure portal, but my access had been temporarily suspended for security review. Even my emergency contact number led to a recording saying the mailbox was full. For the first time since starting this job, I wondered if I was being played. Was this all some elaborate test? Was I actually working for the government, or had I stumbled into something far more dangerous than I'd realized? Either way, I was running out of time to figure out how to stop an attack that nobody else seemed to believe was coming. By day 10 of radio silence from Director Williams, I made a decision that would either save thousands of lives or land me in federal prison. I was going to stop this attack myself. The official channels had failed me, my mysterious government contacts had vanished, and the attackers were now just days away from what my analysis suggested would be a coordinated strike on infrastructure across the entire northeastern United States. I spent 2 sleepless nights researching every cybersecurity expert, journalist, and government official I could find who might listen to someone without official credentials. The breakthrough came when I remembered reading about Dr. Elena Vasquez, a former NSA analyst who'd blown the whistle on security vulnerabilities and now worked as an independent cybersecurity consultant. She had a reputation for taking unconventional intelligence seriously and had contacts throughout the government. Reaching Dr. Vasquez required some creative detective work. I found her through academic papers, tracked down her consulting firm's website, and discovered she'd be speaking at a cybersecurity conference in Philadelphia the next day. I spent my last $300 on a conference ticket and a tank of gas, hoping I could convince someone with actual credibility to validate my findings. The conference was overwhelming, hundreds of cybersecurity professionals discussing threats that seemed trivial compared to what I'd uncovered. I waited through 3 presentations before Dr. Vasquez took the stage to discuss emerging threats to critical infrastructure. Her presentation covered exactly the kind of vulnerabilities I'd been tracking, which gave me hope that she'd understand the significance of my data. After her talk, I approached during the networking break. Dr. Vasquez, I have intelligence about an imminent attack on northeastern infrastructure that matches everything you just described. I know this sounds crazy, but I need 5 minutes of your time. She looked skeptical until I mentioned specific technical details about SCADA system vulnerabilities that weren't common knowledge. In a quiet corner of the conference center, I showed her my analysis on my laptop. Her expression changed from polite interest to genuine alarm as she reviewed my data visualization, showing the scope and timeline of the reconnaissance activities. "Where did you get this information?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I've been working as a contractor analyzing network traffic for a government agency, but my contacts have gone dark and official channels won't listen to me. According to my analysis, the attackers are in final preparation phase. We have maybe 5 days before they execute." Dr. Vasquez studied the data for 20 more minutes, asking technical questions that pushed my knowledge to its limits. Finally, she looked up with an expression I recognized, the same urgency I'd been feeling for weeks. "This is legitimate threat intelligence. The patterns you've identified are consistent with advanced persistent threat activity by state-level actors. Who else has seen this? FBI thinks I'm a conspiracy theorist. DHS won't take reports from civilians. Local law enforcement says it's above their pay grade. My government supervisor has vanished. You're literally my last option before I start posting this on social media and hoping someone important sees it." "Don't post anything publicly," Dr. Vasquez said firmly. "That would alert the attackers that they've been discovered. But I have contacts at NSA and Cyber Command who need to see this immediately. Can you transfer this data to a secure drive?" An hour later, I was sitting in Dr. Vasquez's rental car outside the NSA's Fort Meade facility, watching her disappear through security checkpoints with a thumb drive containing everything I'd discovered. She'd promised to call within 6 hours with an update, but warned me that government response times were unpredictable. 6 hours turned into 12, then 24. My phone remained silent while my monitoring systems showed the attackers moving into what looked like final operational checks. They were testing emergency shutdown procedures on power systems, downloading current shift schedules from water treatment facilities, and mapping real-time traffic control systems across major highways. Time was running out, and I was still completely alone with information that could prevent a national catastrophe. If Dr. Vasquez couldn't get through to the right people, I'd have to find another way to stop this attack, even if it meant sacrificing everything I'd worked for. At 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, my worst fears became reality. I was monitoring live network feeds from my apartment when alarms started going off across my dashboard. The attack I'd been tracking for weeks had finally begun, and it was even worse than I'd predicted. Power grids from Boston to Baltimore started experiencing routine maintenance shutdowns that were anything but routine. The attackers had learned from my analysis. Instead of hitting everything simultaneously, they were rolling out their attack in carefully timed waves designed to look like coincidental equipment failures. First, 3 substations in Massachusetts went offline for scheduled maintenance. 20 minutes later, a water treatment facility in Connecticut reported computer problems that forced them to switch to manual operations. An hour after that, traffic control systems in Philadelphia began displaying error messages that rerouted thousands of commuters onto secondary roads. I watched helplessly as my predictions played out in real time. The attackers were using the backdoors they'd installed over months of careful preparation, triggering cascading failures that would overwhelm emergency response systems. Each individual incident looked manageable, but together they would create chaos across the entire northeastern corridor. My phone finally rang at 3:15 a.m. It was Dr. Vasquez, and she sounded exhausted. "Sarah, we have a problem. I got your intelligence to the right people, but the response has been slower than expected. There are jurisdictional issues between agencies, and some officials are still skeptical about the threat assessment. How much time do we have?" "None," I said, pulling up news feeds that were already reporting scattered infrastructure problems. "It's happening right now. Check the news." I could hear her typing frantically in the background. "Oh my God. Boston Edison is reporting power outages. Connecticut Water Authority issued a boil water advisory. This is really happening." "It's going to get much worse," I said, watching more systems come under attack. "Based on the patterns I've been tracking, this is just the opening phase. They're going to let emergency responders get overwhelmed dealing with these initial failures, then hit the major targets: regional power generation facilities, primary water systems, and transportation hubs." Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, I need you to do something that might get you in serious legal trouble. Can you access the attackers' command and control systems? If we can't stop them through official channels fast enough, maybe you can disrupt their operations directly." It was exactly what I'd been thinking, but afraid to attempt. Hacking back against the attackers would require me to use the same illegal techniques they were using. Even if I succeeded in stopping them, I could face federal charges for unauthorized computer access. But as I watched more critical systems come under attack, the choice became clear. "I'll try," I said, "but I need you to keep pushing through official channels. If I can buy us some time by disrupting their operations, maybe that will be enough for the authorities to respond properly." I spent the next 3 hours launching the most sophisticated counterattack I could manage from my cheap apartment. Using the same backdoors the attackers had created, I began systematically disrupting their command infrastructure. Every time they tried to trigger a new attack wave, I would flood their servers with garbage data or temporarily crash their control systems. It was like playing the most intense video game of my life, except the consequences were real. Every successful defensive move I made potentially saved lives. Every mistake could allow the attackers to complete their mission of crippling infrastructure across 17 states. But I was one person fighting an entire organization, and they had backup systems I hadn't discovered. Around 6 a.m., I realized my counterattacks were only slowing them down, not stopping them. The major phase of their attack was still coming, and when it hit, emergency responders who were already overwhelmed by the initial wave would be completely helpless. I needed help, but there was nowhere left to turn. Unless someone in authority finally took this threat seriously, I was about to watch the attackers succeed in creating the largest infrastructure catastrophe in American history. At 6:23 a.m., my phone exploded with incoming calls. The first was Dr. Vasquez. "Sarah, whatever you did worked. NSA just detected massive disruptions in the attack infrastructure. They're taking this seriously now." The second call was from a number I didn't recognize. "Ms. Chen, this is General Morrison, U.S. Cyber Command. We need your immediate assistance." Within an hour, my cheap apartment had been transformed into an impromptu command center. Government technicians set up secure communication links while cybersecurity specialists from 3 different agencies crowded around my laptops, trying to understand the scope of what I'd been tracking. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't fighting this battle alone. General Morrison, a stern woman with silver hair and intense eyes, got straight to business. "Ms. Chen, your analysis was accurate. We're now tracking coordinated attacks on infrastructure across 17 states. Your early warning has given us a significant advantage, but we need your help to identify their remaining attack vectors before they can complete their mission." The room buzzed with activity as analysts worked to expand on my research. But the attackers weren't finished. Around 8 a.m., they launched what appeared to be their final phase: simultaneous attacks on major power generation facilities that would have cascaded into region-wide blackouts. This was the catastrophic scenario I'd been warning about for weeks. "There," I said, pointing to my screen as anomalous traffic spiked toward 3 nuclear power plants and 2 major hydroelectric facilities. "They're trying to trigger emergency shutdowns that will take those plants offline for days. If they succeed, the entire northeastern grid will collapse." General Morrison coordinated response teams while I worked frantically to identify and disrupt the attack pathways. The next 2 hours felt like the most intense examination of my life, except instead of getting a grade, the result would determine whether millions of people had electricity, clean water, and functional transportation. The breakthrough came when I recognized a pattern in their command structure that I'd seen during my counterattacks. "They're routing everything through a server farm in Virginia," I announced. "If we can physically disconnect those servers, we can cut off their ability to coordinate the remaining attacks." "FBI is already en route to that location," General Morrison replied, "but we need you to guide them to the specific equipment. Can you identify exactly which servers they're using?" For the next 30 minutes, I provided real-time intelligence to FBI agents as they raided a seemingly legitimate data center that had been compromised by the attackers. Using my network analysis, they were able to identify and isolate the specific servers being used for the attack, effectively cutting the digital umbilical cord between the attackers and their targets. By 11 a.m., the immediate crisis was over. The attackers had been neutralized, their backdoors were being systematically removed from critical systems, and emergency responders were working to restore the services that had been disrupted during the initial attack waves. But the full scope of what had been prevented was staggering. "Ms. Chen," General Morrison said as government technicians began packing up their equipment, "your analysis and early warning prevented what could have been the most devastating cyber attack in American history. Without your work, we would have been responding to a complete infrastructure collapse instead of managing isolated incidents." Dr. Vasquez, who had been coordinating with various agencies throughout the crisis, approached me with an expression I'd never seen before: genuine awe. "Sarah, do you understand what you just did? You single-handedly identified, tracked, and helped neutralize a nation-state level attack that could have crippled the entire northeastern United States. There will be briefings about this operation for years." As the last government vehicle pulled away from my apartment building, I sat alone with my laptops, trying to process what had just happened. 3 months ago, I was sleeping in my car, convinced I was a failure. Today, I had helped prevent a national catastrophe. Tomorrow, I would discover that my actions had been noticed at the very highest levels of government. The phone call that would change everything was still 12 hours away. The call came at 11:47 p.m. while I was finally trying to get some sleep after the most exhausting day of my life. The caller ID showed restricted, which I'd learned to associate with government communications. What I didn't expect was the voice on the other end. "Ms. Chen, please hold for the President of the United States." I sat bolt upright in bed, convinced I was either dreaming or being pranked by someone with a very sophisticated phone system. But then a familiar voice came on the line, one I'd heard countless times on television and radio. Ms. Chen, this is President Harrison. I'm calling to personally thank you for your service to our country today. My mouth went completely dry. Mr. President, Thank you, sir. I was just doing my job. It was surreal talking to the most powerful person in the world while sitting in my pajamas in a furnished apartment that still smelled like the previous tenant's cooking. Ms. Chen, what you did today was far beyond any job description. According to my briefing, your analysis and early warning prevented what could have been a catastrophic attack on our nation's infrastructure. General Morrison tells me that without your work, millions of Americans could have lost power, water, and transportation services for weeks. The president continued, his voice carrying the weight of genuine gratitude. I've been briefed on your background, Ms. Chen. I understand that you faced significant personal challenges recently, and that makes your dedication to protecting our country even more remarkable. You exemplify the very best of American citizenship, putting service above self, persevering through adversity, and using your talents to protect your fellow Americans. I found my voice enough to say, thank you, Mr. President. That means more than you could know. And it really did. After months of being told I was worthless by my own family, hearing the President of the United States acknowledge my value felt like vindication beyond my wildest dreams. Ms. Chen, I want you to know that your actions today will not go unrecognized. Tomorrow evening, I'll be addressing the nation about the cyber threats our country faces and the heroes who help protect us. With your permission, I'd like to publicly acknowledge your contribution to keeping America safe. Public acknowledgement by the President. 6 months ago, I couldn't get my parents to acknowledge my promotion at work. Now the leader of the free world wanted to tell the entire country about my achievements. I would be honored, Mr. President. There's one more thing, Ms. Chen. I'm told that your insights into cybersecurity threats have been exceptional. My administration is always looking for talented individuals who can help protect our nation. If you're interested, I'd like to have my staff discuss some opportunities that might be appropriate for someone with your skills and dedication. After we hung up, I stared at my phone for 10 minutes, wondering if the conversation had actually happened. But the follow-up call from a White House staffer confirming details for the next day's announcement made it real. I was going to be mentioned by name in a presidential address to the nation. I couldn't sleep, so I spent the night thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I was the family failure, kicked out of my childhood home and sleeping in my car. Tonight, I was a hero personally thanked by the President of the United States. The transformation felt impossible, like something that happened to other people in movies. But it was real. And tomorrow night, my parents would be watching television when the President said my name on live national television, explaining how their failure daughter had helped save the country. The irony was so perfect it felt like the universe had a sense of humor. I wondered what they would think when they heard the president describe me as an American hero. I wondered if they would finally understand that their constant comparisons and dismissals had been wrong. Most of all, I wondered if this would change anything between us, or if some wounds were too deep to heal even with presidential recognition. Tomorrow night, I would find out. I didn't have to wait long to find out how my family would react. At 6:23 a.m., my phone started ringing with a call from Marcus. Then another call, then text messages, then mom calling, then dad, all within 15 minutes, like they'd coordinated their response. I let them all go to voicemail while I tried to figure out what I wanted to say to people who had thrown me away like garbage 6 months earlier. Marcus's voicemail was predictable. Sarah, oh my God, what is happening? Mom and dad are freaking out. Someone from the White House called them asking about you. They said you're going to be mentioned in the president's speech tonight. Please call me back. We need to talk. Mom's message was more emotional. Sarah, honey, we got a call from someone at the White House saying you'd be mentioned in the president's speech for some kind of cybersecurity work. We had no idea you were involved in anything like that. Please call us back. We need to understand what's happening. Dad's voicemail was the most telling. Sarah, we received a very confusing call from the White House about your work on some national security matter. We told them there must be some mistake, but they insisted they had the right person. Call us immediately. We need to discuss this situation. Even in crisis, Dad couldn't admit he might have been wrong about me. He still thought this was some kind of situation that needed to be managed rather than an achievement to celebrate. Some things never changed. I didn't call back. Instead, I spent the day at government offices being debriefed about the cyber attack and discussing the job opportunities the president had mentioned. By evening, I was back in my apartment preparing to watch myself be acknowledged on national television by the President of the United States. The speech was scheduled for 8 p.m. Eastern. At 7:45, my phone rang again. It was Marcus, but this time I answered. "Sarah, where have you been? We've been trying to reach you all day. Mom and Dad are beside themselves. They don't understand what's happening." "What's happening, Marcus, is that the president is about to thank me on national television for helping prevent a cyber attack that could have crippled the entire northeastern United States. What's happening is that your failure little sister just saved the country." There was silence on the other end. Finally, "Sarah, we didn't know. If we had known you were working on something this important." "You didn't know because you never bothered to ask. You didn't know because every time I tried to explain what I was working on, Dad called it playing with computers and you just sat there saying nothing." "Sarah, please, can we talk about this after the speech? Mom and Dad want to see you. They want to apologize." "They want to apologize because the president is about to say my name on television. Where was that apology when I was sleeping in my car? Where was that apology when Dad called me a failure and changed the locks?" At exactly 8 p.m., I hung up on Marcus and turned on CNN. President Harrison appeared behind the presidential podium, looking directly into the camera as he began discussing cyber threats to American infrastructure. For 20 minutes, he explained the sophisticated nature of modern cyber warfare and the importance of staying vigilant against attacks on critical systems. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Earlier this week, a devastating attack on our nation's infrastructure was prevented thanks to the exceptional work of cybersecurity analyst Sarah Chen, whose early detection and analysis of the threat allowed our security agencies to respond effectively and protect millions of Americans from potential power outages, water system failures, and transportation disruptions. Ms. Chen exemplifies the dedication and expertise that keep our nation safe, and I want to personally thank her for her service. My phone immediately started buzzing with calls and text messages. But I just sat there, staring at the television, thinking about how different my life would have been if my parents had believed in me 6 months ago. The vindication felt good, but it also felt hollow. Presidential recognition couldn't erase the pain of family rejection, even if it proved they'd been wrong about everything. The next morning brought a knock on my apartment door that would completely rewrite everything I thought I knew about the past 6 months. I expected more government officials or maybe reporters who had tracked down my address. Instead, I opened the door to find Marcus standing in the hallway, holding 2 cups of coffee and looking more nervous than I'd ever seen him. "Sarah, we need to talk. There's something I have to tell you that's going to change how you see everything that's happened." His voice carried a weight I'd never heard before, like he was about to confess to a crime. I let him in, mostly out of curiosity. We sat at my small kitchen table, the same one where I'd spent weeks analyzing the data that had made me a national hero. Marcus fidgeted with his coffee cup for a full minute before speaking. "Sarah, do you remember that mysterious job offer you got from Data Secure Solutions? The one that started this whole thing?" I nodded, wondering where this was going. "That offer didn't come from some random government contractor. It came from me." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I work for the NSA, Sarah. I have for 3 years. My tech startup job is a cover story. When I heard about the cybersecurity contract work the agency needed done, I immediately thought of you. I'd been watching your freelance projects, reading your forum posts, seeing the patterns you were identifying that other analysts were missing. You have a gift for this work that most people don't understand." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "Your NSA? But you never said anything. You never defended me when Mom and Dad—" "Because I couldn't," Marcus interrupted. "My work is classified. I couldn't tell anyone, including family, what I really do. But Sarah, I've been watching your career for years. When you were in college studying cybersecurity, I was pulling strings to make sure you got internship opportunities. When you needed references for jobs, I was making quiet recommendations through back channels. I've been trying to help you succeed without being able to tell you I was helping. The revelation was overwhelming. But you let them throw me out. You let Dad call me a failure. You didn't even return my calls when I was homeless. Marcus's face crumpled with genuine anguish. That was the hardest thing I've ever done. I wanted to help you immediately, but I also knew you needed to prove yourself independently. If I'd just given you a job through family connections, you would have always wondered if you really earned it. When you got that contract and started analyzing the threat data, you did that entirely on your own merit. So the cyber attack was real? Completely real. The threat you identified and helped stop was genuine. But I made sure you were the analyst assigned to that data because I knew if anyone could spot the patterns, it would be you. I just didn't expect you to uncover something that significant or that it would lead to presidential recognition. I sat in stunned silence, trying to reframe the entire past 6 months. My mysterious government job hadn't been random luck. It had been my brother orchestrating an opportunity for me to prove myself. The family that had rejected me included someone who had actually believed in me all along, even when he couldn't say so. Sarah, I know this doesn't excuse what Mom and Dad said to you. I know it doesn't erase the pain of being kicked out. But I need you to know that I've always believed in you. I've always known you were capable of great things. I just couldn't find a way to show you that without compromising my cover or robbing you of the chance to prove yourself. For the first time in months, I looked at my brother and saw not the golden child who had always overshadowed me, but someone who had been quietly supporting me from behind the scenes. The revelation didn't fix everything, but it changed everything. Sometimes the people who seem to have it all are actually sacrificing more than you know to help the people they love succeed. 3 weeks later, I stood in my parents' driveway for the first time in 7 months. But this time, I wasn't the desperate daughter begging for acceptance. I was Sarah Chen, the cybersecurity analyst personally thanked by the President of the United States, holding a job offer from the NSA and my own apartment keys. Dad opened the door, and for the first time in my life, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. Sarah, we owe you an apology. We were wrong about everything.
You called me a failure, I said quietly. You changed the locks and threw me away like garbage, but you know what? Thank you.
His face showed confusion, so I continued. Being kicked out forced me to prove myself independently. If you hadn't rejected me, I never would have discovered what I was truly capable of. Your disappointment in me led to the President of the United States recognizing my value on national television. The power reversal was complete. The parents who had demanded I prove my worth were now desperately seeking mine. The daughter they'd called worthless was now someone they needed forgiveness from. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't proving people wrong. Sometimes it's becoming so successful that their opinion of you stops mattering entirely. But family, that's complicated. We're working on it.